The train whistle pierced through the morning air like a lonesome cry, announcing its arrival at the dusty depot of Mercy's Bend. Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hands against the window, watching the vast expanse of Wyoming territory unfold before her eyes. Endless plains of sage and buffalo grass stretching toward mountains that seemed to scrape the very sky. She had left Boston 3 weeks ago, carrying nothing but 2 worn trunks, her mother's Bible, and a promise that felt heavier than all her earthly possessions combined. The promise to marry a man she had never met, in exchange for enough money to save her mother and younger sister from the poorhouse. "End of the line, miss," the conductor announced, touching his cap as he passed her compartment. Clara stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her dark traveling dress, the finest she owned. Though it was 2 seasons out of fashion and had been mended twice at the hem, she had wanted to make a good impression on Mr. Gideon Thatcher, the wealthy merchant who had paid her passage west and would soon claim her as his bride. The platform was chaos. Cowboys drove cattle through the streets, their shouts mingling with the clang of the blacksmith's hammer and the raucous laughter spilling from the saloons. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of horses, so different from the sea salt breeze of Boston Harbor she had known all her life. Clara stepped down from the train, her boots touching the rough wooden planks. The sun blazed overhead, a merciless disk in a sky bleached nearly white. She raised her hand to shield her eyes, searching for the man who would be her husband. That was when she saw him. Not Gideon Thatcher, she would recognize her intended from his photograph. A stern-faced man with graying whiskers and cold eyes. No, this was someone else entirely. A tall man stood near the horse posts, running his hand along a bay mare's neck with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, the way his shoulders filled out his worn leather vest. When he looked up, their eyes met across the crowded platform. The world seemed to pause. His eyes were the color of winter sky, holding depths of something she couldn't name, sorrow, perhaps, or a loneliness that echoed her own. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the depot faded to a distant hum. Clara felt something wild and unfamiliar stir in her chest, like a bird testing its wings against a cage. Then someone grabbed her elbow, breaking the spell. "Miss Whitmore, I presume?" She turned to find Gideon Thatcher standing beside her. He was exactly as his photograph had promised, 60 years to her 22, with a thick gray beard and eyes like chips of flint. He wore a fine black suit despite the heat, a gold watch chain glinting across his vest. "Mr. Thatcher," she managed, dropping into a small curtsy as her mother had taught her. He looked her over with the same calculating gaze she imagined he used to assess merchandise in his store. "You're smaller than I expected, and paler. The sun out here will remedy that quick enough." He signaled to a man standing nearby. "Fetch the ladies' trunks. We'll take them directly to the house." Clara glanced back toward the horse posts, but the tall stranger was already mounting his bay mare. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so slight she might have imagined it, before wheeling his horse around and riding off down the main street. "Come along," Gideon said, his tone suggesting he was not accustomed to repeating himself. "The buggy is waiting." The ride to Gideon's house took them through the heart of Mercy's Bend. Clara tried to take it all in, the false-fronted buildings, the wooden sidewalks, the mix of rough cowboys and proper townswomen going about their business. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that seemed to settle on her skin and clothes within minutes. "You'll need to purchase appropriate attire," Gideon said, eyeing her Boston dress with disapproval. "My wife cannot be seen dressed like some Eastern schoolmarm. I have accounts at the mercantile. You may charge what you need, within reason." His wife. The words sent a chill through her despite the blazing sun. She would be this man's wife within the week, according to their correspondence. It had seemed so abstract when she'd answered his advertisement. "Prosperous merchant seeks refined woman for matrimony. Must be of good character. Able to manage household. No children." The Thatcher house stood at the end of Main Street, a two-story structure that dwarfed its neighbors. It was painted white with green shutters, an attempt at Eastern respectability that looked out of place against the raw landscape. A wrought iron fence enclosed a garden where a few stubborn roses struggled against the dry soil. Inside, the house was dark and cool, heavy curtains blocking out the harsh sunlight. Every surface was cluttered with expensive objects: crystal lamps, porcelain figurines, oil paintings of landscapes Clara didn't recognize. It felt like a museum, not a home. "Mrs. Higgs!" Gideon called out. A severe-looking woman appeared, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "This is Miss Whitmore. Show her to her room and explain the household routine. Dinner is served promptly at 6. I expect punctuality." He left without another word, the door to his study closing with a definitive click. Mrs. Higgs led Clara upstairs to a small room at the back of the house. It was well-appointed but impersonal, like a hotel room. The window looked out over the back garden to the endless prairie beyond. "Mr. Thatcher runs a strict household," the housekeeper said, her voice carefully neutral. "Breakfast at 7, luncheon at noon, dinner at 6. He does not tolerate tardiness. You are not to enter his study without permission. Visitors must be approved in advance. The help does not gossip, and neither should you." Clara nodded numbly. Sitting on the edge of the bed, the mattress was firm, the quilts expensive but cold somehow. "The wedding is set for Saturday." Mrs. Higgs continued. "The seamstress will come tomorrow for your fitting. Mr. Thatcher has already selected the dress." She paused at the door. "A word of advice. Mr. Thatcher values obedience above all else. The last girl, well, best you learn that quickly." "The last girl?" Clara wanted to ask, but Mrs. Higgs was already gone, alone. Clara unpacked her few belongings. Her hands shook as she placed her mother's photograph on the nightstand. Margaret Whitmore stared back at her, thin and worn from years of factory work trying to keep her daughters fed after their father died. This was for her, Clara reminded herself. For her and for little Emily. Only 14 and already showing the first signs of the consumption that had killed their father. But as she stood at the window, watching the sun set over the vast Wyoming plains, she found herself thinking not of duty or sacrifice, but of a tall stranger with winter sky eyes and gentle hands, somewhere out there, beyond the confines of this suffocating house. He was riding free beneath the endless sky. She pressed her palm against the glass, as if she could somehow reach through it to that freedom. Tomorrow she would begin her new life as the future Mrs. Gideon Thatcher. She would learn his rules, wear his chosen dresses, manage his household. She would send money home to Boston and save her family. But tonight, in the privacy of her thoughts, she allowed herself to wonder what might have happened if she had arrived in Mercy's Bend as a free woman, able to follow the pull of a stranger's gaze instead of the chains of a contract signed in desperation 3,000 miles away. The days in the Thatcher house passed with suffocating precision. Clara woke each morning to the sound of Mrs. Higgs rapping on her door at precisely 6:30. Breakfast was a silent affair, with Gideon reading his newspaper while Clara ate her porridge and toast without speaking. He had made it clear on her second day that morning conversation was an unwelcome distraction. A good wife should be seen and not heard, he had said, not looking up from his paper. Beauty fades, but silence is a virtue that improves with age. Clara learned his rules quickly. No singing in the house, it disturbed his concentration. No rearranging the furniture or decorations. Everything had its proper place. No going into town without his permission and a proper escort. No speaking to men unless absolutely necessary. And then, only with downcast eyes and brief words. The wedding dress arrived on Tuesday, a heavy creation of ivory silk and pearl buttons that made her look like a ghost. When she stood before the mirror while the seamstress made adjustments, she barely recognized herself. The girl from Boston with dreams and hopes had disappeared, replaced by this pale creature trapped in expensive fabric. "You're lucky," the seamstress whispered when Gideon left the room. "Mr. Thatcher is particular. Yes, But he's rich. There are worse fates for a woman alone in the territories. Clara wanted to ask about the last girl Mrs. Higgs had mentioned, but Gideon returned before she could form the words. By Thursday, the walls felt like they were closing in. She had written 3 letters to her mother but torn them all up, unable to find words that wouldn't worry her. How could she explain that her future husband watched her like a hawk, measuring every movement against some standard she couldn't fathom? How could she describe the cold dread that settled in her stomach whenever he looked at her with those calculating eyes? That afternoon, while Gideon was at his store, Clara made a decision. She put on her simplest dress and told Mrs. Higgs she needed air for a headache. The housekeeper looked skeptical but said nothing as Clara slipped out the back door. The market square was busy with Thursday trading. Farmers had brought in produce, their wives selling eggs and butter while children darted between the stalls. Clara breathed deeply, savoring the simple chaos after days of rigid order. She was examining ribbons at the notion stall, running the bright colors through her fingers, when she heard a familiar voice. That bay's got more spirit than sense, but she'll settle with the right hand. Clara turned to see the tall stranger from the depot talking to another man near the livery stable. He wore the same leather vest, the same weathered hat pulled low. When he laughed at something his companion said, the sound was rich and genuine, so different from Gideon's dry chuckle. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else. Concern? He said something to his friend and started walking toward her. Clara knew she should leave. Speaking to a strange man in public violated at least 3 of Gideon's rules, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot as he approached. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way the sun had weathered his skin to a warm bronze. "Pardon my forwardness, but are you well? You look—" He paused, seeming to search for words that wouldn't offend. "You look like you could use a friend." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. When was the last time someone had asked after her welfare with genuine concern? "I'm quite well, thank you," she managed. "I was just—" A commotion erupted near the saloon. 3 cowboys, clearly deep in their cups despite the early hour, had spilled onto the street. One of them spotted Clara and began weaving toward her. "Well, looky here," he slurred. "Pretty little thing all alone. How about a drink, sweetheart?" The stranger stepped smoothly between Clara and the drunk cowboy. "The lady's not interested. Wade, move along. Who's gonna make me—" "Hartwell?" Wade swayed on his feet, reaching for the gun at his hip. The stranger, Hartwell, didn't move, but something in his stance changed. Suddenly, he seemed larger, more dangerous. "You don't want to do that," he said quietly. "Sleep it off. You'll thank me tomorrow." For a moment, violence hung in the air. Then one of Wade's companions grabbed his arm. "Come on, he ain't worth it. Plenty of whiskey back at the Silver Dollar." They stumbled away, casting dark looks back. Hartwell waited until they were gone before turning to Clara. "You shouldn't be out alone," he said. "Town's usually quiet, but sometimes—" He gestured toward the saloon. "I know," Clara said. "I just needed—" She stopped, unable to explain her desperate need for air, for freedom, for a moment of being herself instead of Gideon Thatcher's property. Understanding crossed his face. "You're the mail-order bride, Thatcher's woman." The words stung, though they were nothing but truth. "His intended," she corrected. "We marry Saturday." Something shifted in his expression. "I see." He looked away, toward the mountains. "I'm Levi Hartwell. Got a spread about 5 miles north of town. Run horses mostly, some cattle. Clara Whitmore." She knew she should leave, but couldn't make herself move. "From Boston. Long way from home." "Yes." The simple word carried the weight of all her homesickness. They stood in silence for a moment. Around them, the market continued its busy rhythm, but they might have been alone for all Clara noticed. "I should go," she finally said. "If Mr. Thatcher learns I was in town." I'll walk you back, Levi offered. Make sure those cowboys don't circle around. She should refuse, should run back to the safety of her cage. Instead, she nodded. They walked slowly, Levi keeping a proper distance, but somehow making her feel protected nonetheless. He told her about his ranch, about the wild mustangs he was trying to gentle, about the way the mountains looked at sunrise. His voice was warm, unhurried, painting pictures of a life lived under open sky. Been out here 8 years, he said. Came west after... He stopped, a shadow crossing his face. After things changed back home. Clara wanted to ask more, but sensed the pain behind his words. They all had their reasons for being here, thousands of miles from wherever home used to be. Too soon, they reached the edge of Thatcher's property. Levi stopped at the gate. "You'll be all right?" he asked, and she knew he meant more than just her walk to the door. "Yes." She lied. He studied her face for a long moment. "If you ever need anything, if there's trouble, my place is north along Miller's Creek, the house with the red barn." She nodded, knowing she would never take him up on the offer, but treasuring it nonetheless. As she walked up the path, she felt his eyes on her back, a warm presence that disappeared the moment she stepped through Gideon's door. "Where have you been?" Gideon's voice cracked like a whip from the parlor doorway. Clara's heart sank. "I had a headache. I thought the air—" "Mrs. Higgs informed me you went to town." He stepped into the hallway, his face dark with anger. "Alone? Without permission? Would you care to explain yourself?" "I only went to the market." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to make his point. "You are to be my wife. My wife does not parade herself through town like some common trollop. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mr. Thatcher. You will spend the remainder of the day in your room, contemplating proper behavior. Mrs. Higgs will bring your meals. And Clara," his grip tightened slightly, "if you embarrass me again, there will be consequences. Your family's welfare depends on your compliance. Remember that." He released her and stalked back to his study. Clara fled upstairs, her wrist throbbing, her mind spinning. In her room, she sank onto the bed and finally let the tears come. Outside her window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere out there, Levi Hartwell was probably tending his horses, breathing free air under an endless sky. She pressed her hand to the glass again and whispered a prayer to whoever might be listening. 2 more days. 2 more days until she became Mrs. Gideon Thatcher, until the cage door shut forever. She opened her journal and began to write, pouring her heart onto the pages, her fear, her loneliness, and the dangerous warmth that bloomed in her chest when she thought of a rancher with kind eyes who had stood between her and harm without thought for himself. The storm came out of nowhere, as they often did in Wyoming territory. Clara watched from her window as the sky darkened to an ominous yellow-gray, the air growing thick and still. Dust devils danced across the yard, and the horses in the nearby stable whinnied nervously. It was Friday evening, her last night as Clara Whitmore. Tomorrow she would put on that ghostly wedding dress and become Mrs. Gideon Thatcher. The thought made her stomach clench. Gideon had been drinking since dinner. She could hear him downstairs, the clink of glass against bottle, his voice growing louder and more slurred as he talked to himself, or perhaps to the portrait of his late first wife that hung over the mantel. A stern-faced woman who had died 10 years ago under circumstances no one would discuss. The wind picked up, rattling the windows. Mrs. Higgs had retired early, complaining of a headache from the dropping air pressure. The house felt empty despite Gideon's presence below, as if the approaching storm had driven out all warmth and life. Clara tried to read, but the words swam before her eyes. She attempted to write to her mother, but what could she say? "Tomorrow I marry a man who frightens me. Tomorrow I save you and Emily, but lose myself." Thunder cracked overhead, and the first fat raindrop spattered against the window. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs, uneven, heavy. Her door burst open without a knock. Gideon stood in the doorway, his usually neat appearance disheveled. His collar was askew, his gray hair wild. The smell of whiskey preceded him into the room. "My bride," he said, the words thick and mocking. "My beautiful, obedient bride." "Mr. Thatcher, you should rest," Clara said, standing and backing toward the window. "The wedding is tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he laughed, a harsh sound. "Always tomorrow with women. Adelaide said tomorrow too. Tomorrow she'd be a proper wife. Tomorrow she'd give me sons. But her tomorrows ran out, didn't they?" He advanced into the room, and Clara's heart began to race. This was not the cold, controlled man she'd lived with for a week. This was someone else, someone dangerous. "You're not like her," he continued, studying Clara with unfocused eyes. "Younger, prettier, more spirit, though I'll break you of that soon enough." He reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek. "Maybe I should sample what I'm paying for, make sure the goods aren't damaged." Clara jerked away. "Mr. Thatcher, please, you're not yourself." "Not myself." His face darkened. "I'm more myself than I've been in years. Come here." He lunged for her, hands grasping. Clara dodged, but he caught her arm, yanking her against him. His breath was hot and sour on her face as he pressed his lips to hers, rough and demanding. She struggled, pushing against his chest, and managed to wrench free. "No!" The word tore from her throat, his face contorted with rage. "No, you forget yourself. I own you, bought and paid for." He grabbed for her again, and this time when she pulled away, her sleeve tore. That small violence, the sound of ripping fabric, broke something inside Clara. She was not property. She was not a thing to be purchased and used. Without thinking, she grabbed the water pitcher from her washstand and brought it down on his shoulder. He staggered, more from surprise than pain, cursing violently. Clara didn't wait to see what he would do next. She ran, down the stairs, through the dark house, out the back door into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her down, driving rain and dust into her face. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the world in stark, terrifying flashes. She ran blindly, her house slippers quickly soaked through. The storm disoriented her. Was she heading toward town or away from it? Thunder crashed overhead, so loud she couldn't hear her own ragged breathing. A shape loomed out of the darkness. The livery stable. She stumbled inside, gasping. The horses stamped and whinnied, made nervous by the storm. Clara collapsed against a stall door, shivering, her torn dress clinging to her skin. What had she done? Where could she go? Gideon would come after her, would drag her back. The marriage would proceed. Only now he would be vengeful as well as cold. And her family, her poor mother and sister, they would suffer for her defiance. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, the sound lost in the storm's fury. She didn't hear the door open, didn't notice the figure until a gentle hand touched her shoulder. She jerked away with a cry, expecting Gideon's angry face. Instead, she found herself looking up at Levi Hartwell. He was soaked through, his hat dripping water, his clothes muddy. "Clara? My God, what are you doing here?" She couldn't answer, could only shake her head as fresh tears came. He knelt beside her, his face creased with concern. In the lamplight, she knew he could see her torn sleeve, her bruised lips, the marks Gideon's fingers had left on her arm. His jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "I ran," she whispered. "I hit him and I ran and I don't know what to do. My family needs the money, but I can't. Shh." His voice was gentle as he shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and horse and something uniquely him, safe smells, comforting smells. "You're safe now. I won't let him hurt you. You don't understand. He owns me, the contract." "To hell with the contract." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "No piece of paper gives a man the right to—" He stopped, visibly controlling his anger. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm and dry." "I can't go back there." "Not there. My place." When she hesitated, he added, "Just until you figure out what to do next. No obligations, no expectations, just shelter from the storm." She looked into his eyes, those winter sky eyes that had haunted her dreams, and saw only kindness and carefully controlled fury on her behalf. She nodded. He helped her stand, keeping his coat around her shoulders. His horse was in one of the stalls, a sturdy paint gelding that stood calmly despite the storm. "Can you ride?" Levi asked. I think so." He saddled the horse quickly, efficient movements born of long practice. Then he lifted her up, his hands gentle on her waist, before swinging up behind her. She had never ridden like this, pressed against a man's chest, his arms around her as he gathered the reins. "Hold on," he said against her ear. They rode out into the storm. The rain had lessened, but the wind still howled, driving dust and tumbleweeds across their path. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the landscape in eerie snapshots. Clara huddled against Levi's warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. The ride seemed to last forever and no time at all. Finally, lights appeared ahead, a modest ranch house with the red barn he'd mentioned. Levi guided the horse into the barn, out of the wind. "Wait here," he said, helping her down. He quickly tended to the horse, then led her through the rain to the house. Inside was simple but clean, handmade furniture, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books that surprised her. It was clearly a man's space, but there were small touches of softness, a quilt over the back of a chair, curtains at the windows, a vase on the mantel that might once have held flowers. Levi stirred the banked fire to life, adding wood until warmth began to fill the room. "There's a bedroom down the hall," he said without looking at her. It's the guest room now. You'll find some clothes in the wardrobe. They'll be too big, but dry. I'll make coffee." Clara stood uncertainly, dripping on his clean floor. "Mr. Hartwell, Levi, why are you helping me? You don't even know me." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you're brave enough to run from a bad situation. I know you're kind. I've seen you with the children in town. And I know—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Get changed before you catch your death. We can talk after." The guest room was small but cozy. The clothes in the wardrobe were women's clothes, a few simple dresses, nightgowns, undergarments. They smelled of lavender and thyme, as if they'd been waiting here for years. His wife's things, Clara realized with a pang. She changed into a soft flannel nightgown and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, then returned to the main room. Levi had set out coffee and bread with jam and pulled 2 chairs close to the fire. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Finally, Clara found her voice. "Your wife," she said. "How long?" 3 years. He stared into the fire. "Fever took her. She was everything good in my life. After she died, I thought about leaving, going back east. But this was our dream, this ranch. Couldn't abandon it. I'm sorry." He nodded. "Tell me what happened tonight." Haltingly, she told him about Gideon's rules, his coldness, his drinking, about tonight's assault, her desperate flight, about her mother and sister back in Boston, dependent on the money Gideon had promised. Levi's hands clenched into fists as she spoke, but his voice remained gentle. "None of this is your fault. A real man doesn't treat a woman that way. But my family, we'll figure something out. There are other ways to help them, legal ways to break the contract. Maybe, but Clara," he turned to face her fully. "You can't go back there. Promise me that." She looked at him, this man who had taken her in without question, who offered safety without price, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "I promise," she whispered. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, the thunder growing distant. But inside the little ranch house, warmed by fire and unexpected kindness, Clara felt she had found shelter from more than just the weather. Dawn broke clear and bright, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Clara woke in the guest room, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back. She had run. She had escaped. She was in Levi Hartwell's house, wearing his late wife's nightgown. Through the window, she could see him in the corral, working with a young horse. His movements were patient, gentle, letting the animal come to him rather than forcing compliance. So different from Gideon's approach to everything. She dressed quickly in one of Sarah's simple calico dresses. It hung loose on her smaller frame, but it was clean and whole. In the kitchen, she found coffee still warm on the stove and biscuits wrapped in cloth. The morning felt suspended. Unreal. By now, Gideon would have discovered her absence. Would he come looking? Would he involve the law? She had struck him, after all. In the eyes of the law, she was his property, bought and paid for. Levi entered as she was pouring coffee, hanging his hat by the door. "Morning. How did you sleep? Better than I have in a week," she admitted. "Thank you, for everything." He poured his own coffee, leaning against the counter. "Been thinking, my brother Samuel's a doctor up in Cheyenne. He might know a lawyer who could help with your situation. Contract disputes and such." "I don't have money for lawyers. We'll work that out later. First thing is keeping you safe." He paused, studying her face. "Gideon's going to come looking. Man like him doesn't like losing what he thinks he owns." As if summoned by his words, they heard horses approaching. Levi moved to the window, his body tensing. "Stay inside," he said quietly, then stepped out onto the porch. Clara peered through the curtains. Gideon was there on his bay mare, flanked by Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies. Her heart sank. Of course he would involve the law. "Hartwell," Gideon's voice carried clearly, "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Can't say that I do." Levi replied calmly, "Unless one of my horses wandered into your pasture again. Don't play games. The woman, my bride, she was seen riding with you last night. Miss Whitmore was caught in the storm. I offered shelter. Any decent man would do the same." Gideon's face darkened. "She struck me. Assaulted me in my own home. That's a criminal offense." Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, Mr. Thatcher, let's not be hasty. I'm sure this can be worked out peaceful-like." "There's nothing to work out," Gideon snapped. "She signed a contract. Money has changed hands. In the eyes of the law, she's mine." "She's not property," Levi said, his voice taking on an edge. "She's a woman who fled your house in fear for her safety." "Lies! Sheriff, I demand you search this property." Morrison sighed. "Levi, might be best if Miss Whitmore comes out. We can all talk this through civil." Clara's hands shook, but she couldn't let Levi face this alone. She stepped out onto the porch, chin raised despite her fear. "Miss Clara," the sheriff tipped his hat. "You all right, ma'am?" "She's fine," Gideon answered for her. "Clara, get your things. We're going home." "No." The word came out stronger than she felt. "I won't go back with you. You don't have a choice." Gideon dismounted, striding toward the porch. "Sheriff, do your duty." Levi stepped between them. "Touch her and we'll have a problem. Thatcher." "You threatening me?" "Hartwell?" "In front of the law." Morrison held up a hand. "Everyone calm down. Miss Clara, is it true you struck Mr. Thatcher?" Clara lifted her chin. "He forced himself on me. He was drunk and tried to exercise what he called his rights before our wedding. I defended myself." A murmur ran through the deputies. Morrison's expression grew troubled. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am." "It's a lie," Gideon sputtered. "I may have had a drink or 2, but I never—" Her dress was torn. Levi interrupted. "She has bruises on her arms. I found her hiding in the livery stable in the middle of a storm. Terrified. Does that sound like a woman who left willingly?" Morrison studied Clara, noting the marks on her arms that showed purple against her pale skin. "Mr. Thatcher, might be best if everyone takes a day to cool down. Miss Clara, you willing to come to town, stay at the boarding house, neutral ground, so to speak?" Before Clara could answer, one of the deputies pointed down the road. "Rider coming fast." It was a boy from town, kicking his horse into a lather. "Miss Whitmore," he called out. "Telegram came for you this morning. From Boston. Mrs. Crenshaw at the post office said it was urgent." With trembling hands, Clara took the telegram. The words swam before her eyes. Mother gravely ill. Stop. Doctor says days at most. Stop. Emily frightened. Stop. Please send help. Stop. She sank onto the porch step, the paper crumpling in her fist. Her worst fears realized. Her mother dying. Emily alone and scared. And Clara trapped here in this impossible situation. What is it? Levi asked gently. She handed him the telegram wordlessly. His face softened as he read. I'm sorry. You see? Gideon's voice was triumphant. She needs the money I'm providing. This foolishness has gone on long enough. Clara, come home. We'll be married this afternoon, and I'll send funds to your family immediately. Clara looked up at him through her tears. You knew how desperate I was, and you used it to trap me. I offered a business arrangement. You accepted. Don't blame me for your circumstances. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes. The fear was still there, but something else too, a cold clarity. Yes, I need your money, but I won't go back to that house with you. If you want to marry me, it will be today, in town, with witnesses, and afterward, I'll live at the boarding house until I can trust you won't hurt me again. Gideon's face mottled. Ridiculous. A wife lives with her husband. Then I suppose my mother will die without help, and you'll have paid for nothing. She was bluffing, gambling everything on his pride and his investment. The silence stretched taut. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. Sounds like a reasonable compromise to me. What say you, Mr. Thatcher? Gideon looked from Clara to Levi, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the protective way the rancher stood near her. Fine, he spat. The church, 2:00, but afterward, you'll fulfill your duties as my wife, boarding house or no. He mounted his horse and rode off, the deputies trailing behind. Morrison lingered. Miss Clara, you sure about this? There might be other ways. My mother is dying. Sheriff, I don't have time for other ways. He nodded sadly and followed the others. Clara sank back onto the step, shaking. Levi sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. There has to be another solution, he said. My brother might loan... No. She turned to face him, memorizing the kindness in his eyes. I won't be in debt to another good man, at least with Gideon. I know what I'm trading. A business arrangement. Nothing more. Clara, I should go. I need to prepare. She stood, but he caught her hand. Wait. He disappeared inside, returning with a small leather pouch. Take this. Pin it inside your dress. It's not much, but if things go bad, it's enough for a train ticket. Anywhere you want to go. She stared at the pouch, tears threatening again. I can't. You can. Call it a loan if you must, but take it. He pressed it into her hands. Everyone should have a choice. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, a brief brush of lips against stubbled skin. In another life, she whispered, then fled before she could say more. The ride back to town felt like a funeral procession. At the boarding house, Mrs. Crenshaw fussed over her, providing a room and helping her prepare for the wedding. News traveled fast in Mercy's Bend. Everyone knew what had happened, though the details varied depending on who told the tale. At 2:00, Clara stood in the church wearing her gray traveling dress. She refused to wear the wedding gown Gideon had chosen. He waited at the altar, his face set in hard lines. The pews held a scattering of townspeople, there more out of curiosity than celebration. As Reverend Phillips began the ceremony, Clara's eyes found the back of the church. Levi stood there, hat in hand, his face unreadable. Their eyes met and held. She thought of the money pinned inside her bodice, the escape route he had provided. Clara, take this man. The Reverend's words washed over her. She could run, right now. She could turn and run, and she knew Levi would help her. But in Boston, her mother was dying. Emily was alone and frightened. Sometimes love meant sacrifice. Sometimes it meant choosing chains. I do, she whispered, and felt something inside her die with the words. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding. True to her word, Clara lived at Mrs. Crenshaw's boarding house. visiting the Thatcher house only for meals and to perform her wifely duties of managing the household. Gideon had sent the money to Boston as promised, and a telegram confirmed her mother was receiving care, though her condition remained grave. The arrangement frustrated Gideon, but public opinion had shifted somewhat in Clara's favor after the story of her wedding night escape spread. He couldn't force her to live with him without damaging his reputation as a respectable merchant. Clara moved through her days like a ghost, doing what was required. Nothing more. She supervised Mrs. Higgs, reviewed household accounts, and hosted the occasional dinner for Gideon's business associates. But her heart wasn't in any of it. She felt hollowed out, going through motions while the real Clara watched from somewhere far away. She hadn't seen Levi since the wedding. He'd vanished from the church before the ceremony ended, and she heard he'd been keeping to his ranch, avoiding town. It was better this way, she told herself. Safer, less painful, but she dreamed of him. Dreamed of winter sky eyes and gentle hands, of a warm kitchen and safety from storms. She would wake with tears on her cheeks, alone in her narrow boarding house bed. One afternoon, Gideon announced they would attend the harvest festival together. "It's important for business," he said coldly. "You'll wear the blue silk and act like a proper wife. No sulking, no scenes." The festival sprawled across the meadow outside town, with booths selling pies and preserves, games for children, and a dancing platform where a fiddle band played lively tunes. Clara stood beside Gideon as he conducted business, smiling when required, speaking only when addressed. Then she saw him. Levi was at the horse auction, examining a wild Mustang mare someone had brought in. He looked thinner, she thought, his face more weathered. When he glanced up and their eyes met across the crowd, the impact nearly staggered her. "I need some air," she told Gideon. "Don't wander far," he warned, already turning back to his conversation. Clara walked toward the meadow's edge, past the last of the booths to where wildflowers grew thick and undisturbed. She didn't hear footsteps behind her until Levi spoke. "Clara," she turned, her heart hammering. "You shouldn't be here. If Gideon sees—" "I don't care." He stood several feet away, as if he didn't trust himself to come closer. "Are you all right?" "Truth, not what you tell everyone else. I'm surviving." She managed a weak smile. "My mother is getting care. That's what matters." "Is it?" His voice was rough. "What about you? What about what you need?" "Don't." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Please don't. I can't. I made my choice. Did you, or did circumstances choose for you?" He took a step closer. "Clara, you don't have to live like this. There are other ways." "What ways?" The words burst out of her. "Shall I abandon my dying mother, leave my sister to fend for herself, run away and become—" "What? Your kept woman? Another scandal for the town to whisper about?" "My wife," he said quietly. "You could be my wife. Properly. Legally. I've talked to Sam's lawyer friend. The marriage could be annulled. Gideon forced himself on you. There are grounds." "Stop!" She was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. "Do you think I haven't thought of it? Dreamed of it? But it takes time, and money. And meanwhile, my family suffers. I can't be that selfish." He closed the distance between them, catching her hands in his. "It's not selfish to want happiness, to want love." "Love?" She laughed bitterly. "I can't afford love. Can you afford to live without it?" His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "Clara, I've tried to stay away. Tried to forget that night in my kitchen, the way you looked at me, but I can't. I think about you every moment. Wonder if you're safe, if you're eating enough, if he's treating you well. It's driving me mad." She looked up at him through her tears. "You think it's easier for me? You think I don't lie awake remembering the only night I've ever felt truly safe? But I have responsibilities." "To hell with responsibilities." He pulled her closer, one hand cupping her face. "For once in your life. Clara, take what you want. What do you want?" "You," she whispered. "God help me. I want you." The kiss was nothing like Gideon's brutal claiming. Levi's lips were gentle at first, asking permission rather than taking it. When she responded, pressing closer, his arms came around her, holding her as if she were something precious and breakable. Time stopped. The world narrowed to this moment, this meadow, this man who kissed her like she was air and he had been drowning. Her hands found their way into his hair, holding him close, trying to memorize every sensation against the long, empty days ahead. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Levi rested his forehead against hers. "Come away with me," he said. "Right now. We'll ride north. Send for your sister. Find a way to help your mother that doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself." She was tempted. So tempted she could taste it. But he'd come after us. He'd use the law, claim I stole from him. You could be arrested for kidnapping. I won't let you risk that for me. I'd risk anything for you. I know. She touched his face gently. That's why I have to say no. Voices called from the festival. The afternoon was waning. Soon Gideon would notice her absence. "Meet me," Levi said urgently. "Tomorrow afternoon. The old line shack where the creek bends. Just to talk. Please, Clara." She should refuse. Should walk away now before this became something neither of them could control. But looking into his eyes, she couldn't form the word no. 2:00, she whispered, then pulled away and walked back toward her prison. Gideon was irritated by her long absence, but distracted by a business deal. The ride back to town was silent. At the boarding house, Clara pleaded a headache and retired early. She lay awake most of the night, torn between guilt and anticipation. She was a married woman contemplating, what, an affair? The word felt tawdry, wrong for what existed between her and Levi. But what else could it be called? The next afternoon, she told Mrs. Crenshaw she was visiting the church for prayer. Instead, she walked out of town and along the creek path, her heart pounding with each step. The line shack was old, a remnant from the area's cattle drive days. But the roof was sound and someone, Levi, had swept it clean, laid blankets on the narrow cot, placed wildflowers in a tin cup on the windowsill. He was waiting outside, pacing like a caged wolf. When he saw her, his whole body stilled. "You came. I shouldn't have, but you did." He took her hand, led her inside. I needed to show you something. A dream. What could be?" The shack was transformed, clean and cozy, with supplies laid in as if for a journey. Maps spread on the small table, marked with routes north. "My brother wrote," Levi said. "There's work in Cheyenne, good work. We could start fresh, build something together. I've been fixing this place up, thinking, planning." She studied the maps, seeing the life he envisioned. A small house, honest work, children playing in a yard, waking each morning in the arms of someone who loved her. It was everything she had never dared dream. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but it's just a dream." "It doesn't have to be." He moved behind her, his arms coming around her waist. "Clara, I know I'm asking you to risk everything, but I'm risking too. My heart, my sanity. Every day you stay with him kills me a little more." She leaned back against him, allowing herself this moment of weakness. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think it doesn't kill me too? But my mother, I'll help your family. We'll find a way, together." His lips brushed her ear. "Just say yes. Say you'll try." She turned in his arms, seeing the desperate hope in his eyes, and in that moment, she knew she was lost, right or wrong, sin or salvation. She couldn't walk away from this again. "Yes," she breathed, and pulled his head down to hers. The world exploded into sensation. This kiss was different from the first, hungrier, more desperate. Years of loneliness, weeks of fear, all poured into the connection between them. When Levi lifted her, carried her to the cot, she didn't protest. When his hands shook as he unpinned her hair, she helped him. They came together like storm and earth, necessary and inevitable, in the golden afternoon light. In a forgotten shack by a meandering creek, Clara discovered what it meant to be cherished, to be touched with reverence, to give herself freely rather than as payment for a debt. Afterward, they lay entwined, hearts gradually slowing. Levi traced patterns on her bare shoulder while she listened to his breathing. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None." She meant it. Whatever came next, whatever price she paid, this afternoon would sustain her. "Then we make plans," he said. "Real ones. I won't let you go back to him. Clara, not after this. Not ever again." For a week, Clara lived a double life. Days belonged to duty, managing Gideon's household, maintaining the facade of a dutiful if distant wife. But afternoons were stolen moments at the line shack, planning a future with Levi that seemed both impossible and inevitable. They were careful. Clara varied her routes, always had plausible excuses for her absences. Levi avoided town entirely, working his ranch and preparing for their escape. He had written to his brother, arranged for work and lodging in Cheyenne. Clara had penned a letter to Emily, to be mailed once they were safely away, promising to send for her as soon as possible. Everything was falling into place, too perfectly. Perhaps Clara should have known that happiness that intense couldn't last. It was Mrs. Higgs who destroyed it all, though perhaps not intentionally. The housekeeper mentioned casually over breakfast that she'd seen Clara walking along the creek path several times that week. "Beautiful area for contemplation," she said, but her eyes were knowing. Though dangerous for a woman alone, all sorts of drifters use those old line shacks. Gideon's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Line shacks? Oh yes, from the cattle drive days. "Most are falling down, but I heard Levi Hartwell's been fixing one up. Strange thing for a man to do, unless—" She trailed off, suddenly busy with the dishes. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara kept her eyes on her plate, willing her hands not to shake. She could feel Gideon's stare boring into her. "I see," he said finally. "Clara, we'll be dining at home tonight. Cancel your return to the boarding house. It's time you resumed your proper place as my wife. I have an engagement this afternoon. Cancel it." His voice was deadly quiet. "In fact, I think it best if you remain here today. You look peaked. Perhaps you're ill." Clara met his eyes, seeing the cold fury there. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. "I feel fine," she said. "Nevertheless, you'll stay in, Mrs. Higgs will see to your needs." He stood, straightening his coat. "I have business in town. We'll discuss your contemplative walks when I return." After he left, Clara found herself effectively imprisoned. Mrs. Higgs apologetically but firmly refused to let her leave, citing Mr. Thatcher's orders. The doors were locked from outside. Even her bedroom window had been nailed shut at some point, a precaution, she realized, that Gideon had taken after her first escape. 2 o'clock came and went. Clara paced her room, imagining Levi waiting at the shack, worry growing as the minutes passed. Would he think she'd changed her mind, lost her nerve, or would he sense danger? As the sun began to sink, she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Sheriff Morrison's voice, then Gideon's, and others she couldn't place. She flew to the window. A group of men dismounted in the yard. Gideon looked triumphant, Morrison uncomfortable. 2 deputies flanked a figure with bound hands. "Levi." "No!" The word tore from her throat. She ran for the stairs but found Mrs. Higgs blocking her way. "Please, miss, don't make this worse." "Move!" Clara tried to push past, but the older woman was surprisingly strong. "He said you'd react this way. Said to keep you here until it's sorted." Mrs. Higgs looked genuinely distressed. "It's for your own good," he said. "That Hartwell boy's turned your head with his sweet talk." Clara could hear Gideon's voice from the parlor below, pompous and satisfied. "Caught him at the shack, just as you said we would. Had all manner of things there, supplies for running off, maps, even some of my wife's belongings. Her hairpins, a ribbon from her dress, small things she'd left behind, pieces of herself she'd shed in moments of happiness. Now, evidence of her betrayal. Mr. Thatcher." Morrison's voice was weary. "Finding a man in a line shack ain't exactly a crime. He was clearly lying in wait for my wife. You heard Mrs. Higgs. Clara's been walking that path regular. He knew her routine, planned to abduct her. That's a mighty serious accusation. I have proof. Gideon's voice rose. Letters. Plans to take her to Cheyenne. That's kidnapping. Sheriff. Transport across territorial lines for immoral purposes. Clara's legs gave out. She sank to the floor as Mrs. Higgs fussed around her. Letters. They're beautiful, foolish letters. Levi had kept them, probably cherished them as she had his. Now they would be his destruction. Please, she whispered to Mrs. Higgs. Please let me speak to them. I can explain. Nothing to explain. Dear, the housekeeper's sympathy was somehow worse than cruelty. Mr. Thatcher's only protecting you. That Hartwell boy lost his mind after his wife died. Everyone knows it. Taking advantage of an innocent young woman who don't know the ways of the frontier. Clara wanted to scream that she wasn't innocent, wasn't taken advantage of, that every moment with Levi had been chosen, cherished, real in a way nothing in Gideon's house could ever be. But what did her words matter? She was a woman, property of her husband. Her testimony would be dismissed as female hysteria or, worse, evidence of moral corruption. She heard boots on stairs, spurs jingling. Morrison appeared, hat in hand, looking deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Thatcher, sorry to disturb you. Ma'am, your husband says you might have letters. From Hartwell? Need to collect them as evidence. I have nothing. Her voice sounded dead even to her own ears. Now, ma'am, I gotta do my job. If you got letters, best to hand them over peaceful-like. She thought of Levi's letters hidden beneath her mattress. Beautiful words about their future, about his love for her, about dreams of children with her eyes and his steadiness. She thought of him in chains, proud head bowed, arrested for the crime of loving her. In my room, she whispered, under the mattress. Morrison looked like he'd rather be anywhere else as he climbed the stairs. He returned with the small bundle, not meeting her eyes. Sheriff? Clara grabbed his sleeve as he passed. What will happen to him? Trial, most like. Judge comes through end of the month. He patted her hand awkwardly. Don't fret, ma'am. Justice will be done. But what was justice in a world where women were property? Where love was a crime if it threatened a man's ownership? After Morrison left, Gideon appeared in the hallway. His face was flushed with victory and something else, a cruel satisfaction that made Clara's stomach turn. Well, wife, he said, it seems your afternoon walks are at an end. What have you done? Her voice was barely a whisper. Protected my investment, made clear what happens to those who try to steal from me. He climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately. Did you think I was blind? Stupid? Did you think I wouldn't notice the change in you? The way you glowed after your contemplative walks? He stood over her, and for the first time, Clara saw past the cold businessman to something worse underneath. Not just possessiveness, but genuine pleasure in her pain. You gave yourself to him. It wasn't a question. My pure, proper bride, spreading your legs in a dusty shack like a common whore. The slap came from nowhere, snapping her head to the side. Mrs. Higgs gasped, but didn't intervene. However, Gideon continued as if nothing had happened. I'm willing to overlook your indiscretion. You're young, impressionable. He took advantage of your feminine weakness, but it ends now. You'll move back to this house immediately. You'll be a proper wife in every sense. And you'll stand in court and testify that Hartwell forced his attentions on you, that you were an unwilling victim of his obsession. No. The word was quiet but firm. His hand tangled in her hair, yanking her head back. You'll do as you're told, or I'll see him hanged. Make no mistake, Clara, your cooperation is all that stands between Hartwell and a noose. The territorial judge takes a dim view of men who corrupt other men's wives, especially when the husband is a respected businessman who contributes generously to political campaigns. He released her, stepping back to straighten his cuffs. You have until tomorrow to decide, his life or your pride. Choose wisely. After he left, Clara remained on the floor, Mrs. Higgs fluttering around her with cold compresses for her reddening cheek. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. She thought of Levi in a cell, probably beaten, certainly suffering. Thought of their dreams crumbling to ash. Thought of the choice Gideon had given her, condemn the man she loved or save him by destroying him herself. Outside, night fell over Mercy's Bend. Somewhere in the darkness, Levi waited in chains while she sat in a different kind of prison. And tomorrow, she would have to choose between love and life, between truth and survival. There was no good answer. There never had been. Not from the moment she'd stepped off that train and into a world that saw her as property to be bought and sold. But now, Levi would pay the price for her desperate grab at happiness. She finally understood what Gideon's first wife must have felt, why she had died so mysteriously. Sometimes the cage became unbearable. Sometimes death seemed the only door to freedom. But Clara wouldn't take that path. Not while Levi lived. Not while there was still a chance, however slim, to save him. She would do what she must, and then she would find a way to make Gideon pay for forcing this choice upon her. The courthouse was packed the day of the trial. Word had spread through Mercy's Bend like wildfire. The respected merchant, his runaway bride, and the rancher accused of trying to steal her. It was the most excitement the town had seen in years. Clara sat in the front row, dressed in the modest gray dress Gideon had chosen for her. Her face was pale but composed, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Gideon sat beside her, the picture of an aggrieved husband, occasionally patting her shoulder in a show of forgiveness that made her skin crawl. She hadn't seen Levi since his arrest 2 weeks ago. Sheriff Morrison had refused her requests to visit, citing Gideon's concerns about undue influence. But she heard the whispers, that he was thin, bearded, defiant, that he'd refused to plead guilty despite the mounting evidence. Judge Harlan Winters presided, a stern man with silver hair and cold eyes. He was known for harsh sentences and little sympathy for those who violated the social order. Gideon had chosen the timing of his accusations well. The territory versus Levi Hartwell. The bailiff announced charges of attempted kidnapping, corruption of a married woman, and conspiracy to commit adultery. Levi was brought in, shackled. Clara's heart clenched at the sight of him. Thinner, yes, with bruises fading to yellow on his face, but his head still high. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and in that brief moment, she tried to pour all her love, her sorrow, her desperate plan into her gaze. The prosecutor, a pompous man named Cornelius Blackwood, laid out the case methodically. The letters were presented, Levi's words of love twisted into evidence of obsession and criminal intent. The supplies at the line shack became proof of planned abduction. Clara's own actions, fleeing to his ranch during the storm, the witnessed kiss at the festival, were painted as evidence of his predatory influence over an innocent woman. This man, Blackwood declared, took advantage of a young woman's homesickness and confusion. He stalked her, seduced her, planned to steal her away from her lawful husband. Such behavior cannot be tolerated in a civilized society. Levi's lawyer, a young man barely out of law school whom the court had appointed, did his best. He spoke of Levi's good character, his standing in the community, the death of his wife that had left him lonely but not criminal. But against the evidence and Gideon's influence, it felt like throwing pebbles at a mountain. Then came the moment Clara had dreaded. "I call Mrs. Clara Thatcher to testify," Blackwood announced. The walk to the witness stand felt like mounting a scaffold. Clara placed her hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth while knowing she was about to lie with every breath. "Mrs. Thatcher," Blackwood began, his voice oily with false sympathy. "I know this is difficult, but please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." Clara looked at Levi. He was watching her intently, and she saw the moment he understood what was coming. A slight shake of his head. "Don't do this. Don't sacrifice yourself for me." But what choice did she have? Mr. Hartwell was persistent in his attentions. She began, her voice barely audible. "From the moment I arrived in Mercy's Bend." "Speak up, please," Judge Winters commanded. Clara raised her voice, hating every word. He approached me repeatedly. Despite knowing I was engaged to Mr. Thatcher, he took advantage of my confusion and fear in a new place. Tell us about the night of the storm. I was frightened by the weather. I ran outside, became disoriented. Mr. Hartwell found me and took me to his ranch. I was grateful at first, but then she forced tears. Not difficult given her breaking heart. He made advances. I resisted, but I was alone, defenseless. You lie. Levi surged to his feet, chains rattling. Clara, don't do this! Silence! The judge banged his gavel. Another outburst and you'll be removed. Blackwood continued his questioning, each answer driving another nail into Levi's coffin. Clara painted herself as a victim, manipulated and coerced. She confirmed the letters were written under duress. She claimed the meetings at the line shack were against her will, that she'd been too frightened to refuse. Through it all, Levi watched her with such pain in his eyes that she could barely continue. But she thought of Gideon's threat, the noose waiting if she refused to play her part. When Blackwood finished, Levi's lawyer approached for cross-examination. The young man was sweating, clearly out of his depth. Mrs. Thatcher, if you were so frightened of Mr. Hartwell, why didn't you report his behavior to your husband or the sheriff? For the first time, Clara looked directly at Gideon. I was afraid, she said clearly, of what my husband might do. A murmur ran through the courtroom. It wasn't the answer anyone expected. Afraid of your husband, the lawyer pressed, sensing an opening. Can you explain? Blackwood objected, but Judge Winters overruled him. The witness may answer. Clara took a breath. She'd stick to the script Gideon had given her, but she'd make sure the town heard the truth beneath it. My husband is a powerful man. I feared his reaction, the night of the storm. He had been drinking and assertive in claiming his marital rights. I fled in fear. Yes, Mr. Hartwell found me. Yes, he took me to his ranch, but I was running from something, not to someone. Mrs. Thatcher, the judge warned. Please confine yourself to answering about the defendant. But the seed was planted. She saw it in the faces of some women in the gallery, in Sheriff Morrison's uncomfortable expression. The rest of her testimony continued as Gideon had demanded. She painted Levi as the villain, herself as the victim. But she'd given them something to think about, a crack in Gideon's perfect facade. When she stepped down, Levi was staring at her with something like understanding. He knew what she was doing, why she was doing it. The knowledge didn't ease the pain in his eyes, but there was forgiveness there too. Other witnesses followed, Mrs. Higgs testified about Clara's walks. The shopkeeper's wife described seeing them together at the line shack. Each testimony built the case higher. Finally, Levi was allowed to speak in his own defense. He stood, chains clanking, and faced the court with dignity. I loved Clara Whitmore from the moment I saw her, he said simply. Not Mrs. Thatcher. She wasn't that yet, not in any way that mattered. I saw a frightened girl far from home, about to be shackled to a man who saw her as property. Mr. Hartwell, his lawyer whispered urgently. Please. But Levi continued. Yes, I helped her the night of the storm. She was running for her life, bruised and terrified. Any decent man would have done the same. Yes, I grew to love her. Yes, we met. Yes, I dreamed of a future together. But every moment was her choice. I never forced, never coerced. The only crime here is that in Mercy's Bend, a woman has no right to choose her own fate. The courtroom erupted. Judge Winters banged his gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the gallery. When order was restored, his face was thunderous. Mr. Hartwell, you stand accused of serious crimes. This is not a forum for your philosophical views on marriage and women's rights. Then what is it? Levi asked. A theater where we pretend that Gideon Thatcher didn't buy a woman like cattle, where we ignore the bruises on her arms, the fear in her eyes, where we call love a crime because it threatens one man's property rights. Enough. Winters slammed his gavel. I've heard enough. This court will recess. I'll render my verdict in 1 hour. The hour passed like a lifetime. Clara sat frozen between Gideon and Mrs. Crenshaw from the boarding house, who'd come to offer support. Gideon's hand on her arm was a shackle, his whispered words a reminder of what hung in the balance. When court reconvened, Judge Winters's face was grave. "Levi Hartwell, stand for verdict." Levi rose, shoulders square. "On the charge of attempted kidnapping, this court finds you guilty. On the charge of corrupting a married woman, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit adultery, guilty." Each word was a stone on Clara's heart. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, the only way to keep from crying out. "However," the judge continued, and the courtroom held its breath, "in consideration of your previous good standing, your service to this community, and certain irregularities in this case, I am inclined toward leniency." Gideon's hand tightened painfully on Clara's arm. "Levi Hartwell, I sentence you to 2 years in territorial prison. However, this sentence is suspended on the following conditions. You will leave Mercy's Bend within 48 hours. You will not return for a period of no less than 5 years. You will have no contact, direct or indirect, with Mrs. Clara Thatcher. Violation of any of these conditions will result in immediate imprisonment. Do you understand?" "I understand." Levi's voice was steady. "Then this court is adjourned." The gallery exploded in discussion. Some felt justice had been served, others that Levi had gotten off too easy. Clara felt only emptiness, banishment instead of prison, but banishment nonetheless. 5 years, a lifetime. As the bailiff led Levi out, he passed close to where she sat. For just a moment, their hands brushed. The lightest touch, but it carried all their broken dreams. "Be strong," he whispered, so low only she could hear. Then he was gone. Outside the courthouse, Gideon played the magnanimous victor, telling anyone who'd listen how he'd urged the judge toward mercy. The boy was misguided, not evil. Exile will give him time to reflect on his actions. But that night, alone with Clara in the house she could no longer escape. His mask dropped. "You performed adequately," he said coldly, "though your little improvisation about fearing me was unnecessary. Still, it's done. Hartwell is gone, and you're here where you belong." "You've won," Clara said numbly. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" "I've restored order," he corrected. "You'll thank me eventually. Women always do, once they accept their place." He moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Your things from the boarding house have been brought here. You'll sleep in the adjoining room to mine. It's time this marriage was complete in every sense." The threat was clear. With Levi gone, nothing stood between her and Gideon's full claim on her. But as she prepared for bed in her new prison, Clara remembered the leather pouch Levi had given her, still hidden in her corset. She remembered the look in his eyes as he was led away. Not defeat, but determination. "Be strong," he'd said. She would be. She'd endure whatever came next, because this wasn't over. Gideon had won this battle. But somewhere out there, Levi was free. And someday, somehow, she would be too. The judge had said 5 years, but judges could be wrong. Laws could change. And love, real love, had a way of surviving even the harshest sentences. She lay in the darkness, listening to Gideon's snores through the wall, and began to plan. 2 years passed like centuries. Clara moved through her days mechanically, managing Gideon's household with cold efficiency while her heart remained frozen. She had learned to survive his demands, to retreat deep inside herself during his visits to her bed, to maintain a facade of submission while nurturing a flame of hope that refused to die. Her mother had passed 6 months after the trial, never knowing the full price Clara had paid for her medical care. Emily, now 16, wrote regularly from Boston where she worked as a seamstress, saving every penny to someday join her sister out west. Clara begged her to stay away, unable to bear the thought of Emily seeing what she'd become. Then, on a crisp October morning, everything changed. Clara was at the Mercantile, reviewing purchases, when she overheard 2 ranchers talking. "Shame about old Thatcher," one said. "Hart gave out right at his desk, they say." "Man worked himself to death," the other agreed. "Though, between you and me, He'd been looking poorly since that business with his missus and the Hartwell boy. Clara's hand stilled on the ledger. "Excuse me," she said carefully. "Are you speaking of Mr. Gideon Thatcher?" The men tipped their hats. "Yes, ma'am. Sorry. Thought you'd have heard by now. Found him this morning. Doc says he'd been gone since last night." The world tilted. Clara gripped the counter, her mind racing. Gideon was dead. She was, what, free? The word felt foreign after so long. She returned home in a daze to find Sheriff Morrison and Doc Sullivan waiting. The doctor confirmed what the ranchers had said. Gideon's heart had given out. Years of rich food and poor temper. Sullivan said quietly, "I warned him after his first spell last year." First spell? Gideon had never mentioned feeling unwell. But then, he wouldn't have shown weakness. Not to her. The funeral was well attended, but subdued. Gideon had been respected for his wealth, not loved for his character. Clara stood by the graveside in widow's black, accepting condolences she didn't feel, already planning her next moves. The will reading brought surprises. Gideon, perhaps confident he'd outlive his young wife by decades, had never updated it after their marriage. His estate was divided between distant cousins back east and various business partners. Clara received only what law mandated, the widow's third. But even a third of Gideon's wealth was more than she'd ever dreamed of possessing. More importantly, she was free. That night, alone in the house for the first time in 2 years. Clara pulled out the leather pouch Levi had given her. She'd never spent it, keeping it as a talisman of hope. Now she emptied it on the bed, counting the coins, and made her decision. The next morning, she visited Gideon's lawyer. "I want to liquidate my portion of the estate immediately," she announced. "Everything, the house, the goods, the business interests. Convert it all to cash." The lawyer, Mr. Pembroke, looked shocked. "Mrs. Thatcher, surely you want to consider—" "My name," she said firmly, "is Clara Whitmore, and I've had 2 years to consider." It took 3 weeks to settle everything. 3 weeks of curious looks and whispered speculation. The young widow Thatcher, selling everything, clearly planning to leave. Where would she go? What would she do? Clara told no one her plans. She wrote to Emily, enclosing money for travel, telling her to come west but to stop in Cheyenne, not Mercy's Bend. She hired men to crate the few belongings she wanted to keep. And she counted days, 5 weeks after Gideon's death. She stood on the platform where her journey had begun, waiting for the eastbound train. But she wasn't going to Boston. She was going to Cheyenne. The journey took 2 days, 2 days of growing anticipation and fear. What if Levi had moved on? What if he'd found someone else? What if the love they'd shared couldn't survive 2 years of separation? Cheyenne was bigger than Mercy's Bend, bustling with the energy of a growing city. Clara took a room at a respectable hotel and began her search. It didn't take long. Levi Hartwell's name was known at the stockyards. He worked for his brother, helping manage the veterinary practice, and had a small spread north of town where he raised horses. She hired a buggy the next morning, her hands shaking as she held the reins. The directions were simple. Follow the north road 5 miles. Look for the ranch with the painted fence. She saw him before he saw her. He was in the corral, working with a young stallion, patient as always. He looked older, she thought, his hair longer, his face more weathered. But his movements were the same, that gentle strength that had first caught her eye. The horse noticed the buggy first, shying away. Levi turned to calm it, then froze. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the dusty yard. Then he was vaulting the fence, running toward her. Clara barely had time to climb down from the buggy before she was in his arms, lifted off her feet, spinning in the bright morning sun. "Clara," he breathed against her hair. "My God, Clara, is it really you?" "It's me." She laughed through her tears. "I'm here. I'm free." He set her down but didn't let go, his hands framing her face as if she might disappear. "How? The sentence was 5 years. Gideon died. The words felt strange, liberating. His heart gave out. I'm a widow, Levi, free to make my own choices. Something shifted in his eyes, relief, joy, and lingering pain from their separation. 2 years, he said quietly. 2 years of wondering if you were safe, if he was treating you well. The not knowing was torture. It's over now, she said firmly. All of it. The past is buried with Gideon. I have money, enough to start fresh. Emily's coming west. We can build the life we dreamed of. Clara, he pulled back slightly, searching her face. Are you sure? After everything that's happened, everything you've been through, she silenced him with a kiss, pouring 2 years of longing into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I've never been more sure of anything, she said. I love you, Levi Hartwell. I loved you from that first look at the station, and I'll love you until my last breath. The question is, yes, he interrupted. I haven't asked anything yet. Doesn't matter. Whatever you're asking, the answer is yes. He grinned, looking suddenly boyish. But if you want to be proper about it, he dropped to one knee right there in the dusty yard, pulling a simple silver ring from his pocket. I've carried this for 2 years, hoping against hope. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Really marry me, freely and joyfully, for love and nothing else? Yes, she laughed, tears streaming. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Then he stood and kissed her again, sealing promises that needed no witnesses but the vast Wyoming sky. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony with his brother and Emily as witnesses. No grand church, no expensive dress. Just 2 people pledging their lives to each other in the parlor of the ranch house Levi had built with his own hands. Their life together wasn't always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick horses and failed crops. There were those who whispered about their past, though most of Cheyenne didn't know or care about the scandal in Mercy's Bend. But there was also joy. Mornings waking tangled together, evenings sitting on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold. There was Emily's wedding to Sam's young assistant, and the arrival of nieces and nephews to spoil. There were their own children, 3 of them, with Clara's dark hair and Levi's steady eyes. And there was love, the kind of love that had survived separation and scandal, that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, the kind of love that made every struggle worthwhile. Years later, when their hair was gray and their children grown, Clara would sometimes find the journal she'd kept during those dark days in Gideon's house. She would read her desperate words, remember the fear and loneliness, marvel at how far she'd come. Regrets? Levi would ask, finding her in these contemplative moments. Never, she would answer, closing the journal and turning to him. Every step led me to you. How could I regret the path that brought me home? And in the twilight of their lives, on the porch of the house they'd built together, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where they'd first reunited, Clara knew the truth of those words. She had been promised to another, bought and sold like property. But one look from a rancher at a dusty train station had changed everything. Love had made her stay, love had set her free, and love had brought her home at last. Thank you all for listening to this story of love and perseverance in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you by a cozy fireplace, on your commute? Or perhaps under the stars like our cowboys of old? Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and connections make our campfire circle complete.